Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this video, police were called to a house in Oldsmar near Tampa after a strange scene was discovered. But who could have done this? All that was left behind was a name. 3 letters from beyond the grave. But of course, it's just never that simple, is it? Before we get into it, please click that subscribe button to see new stories for the dark every single week. Now, let's give it a go. It was late on the morning of October 11th, 2003, if you can believe that Tim Permenter was casually cruising on through a Floridian suburb. This was in the city of Oldsmar, just outside of Tampa, and that cool autumn day, he was just going to do what he regularly would, see his girlfriend. 36-year-old Tim had been dating 39-year-old Karen, and the relationship had been going on for about 3 months at this stage, and been going pretty swell. Look at you, Tim. Tim, he was a BMW, a Beamer salesman. In fact, that's where he met Karen. She had walked into the dealership one day looking for a Beamer. Tim says, hell yeah. You know, I mean, car salesman, I suppose you have to be kind of charming. You know, if you're a car salesman, you can either be sleazy or charming. Tim was the second one, I hope. Regardless, they just hit it off. Tim, before this, he had been like a Navy SEAL, if you can believe that. He was known as charming, extremely intelligent. In fact, Karen's family would say that when they were introduced, he had wowed them by beating them all at the game Trivial Pursuit. You need some general knowledge, useless information? Tim was your man. Also, sell you a car or kill you. So he finally arrived and parked up outside his girl Karen's home at 2030 Montego Court. He got out of his blue BMW convertible and wandered over to the front door, giving her one of these, and knock, knock, knock. He'd been over at her house just the previous night, and it had been a quiet ass night. He'd left her at about 7:30 p.m, gone home. He didn't stay that late the previous night, because this Saturday morning, Karen was due to work, and she would usually get up for work early. But she had missed work that day, and Tim had been calling her all morning, and she hadn't been answering her phone. In fact, that's why Tim was calling over. He'd begun to worry about her. So Tim, now standing outside her front door, knock, knock, knocking, to no answer, the seconds of him not hearing from her were just getting louder and louder in his head. He began to get that heavy gut feeling that something was wrong. He tried the door handle and it gave. Door opened. It had been unlocked. So he stepped in, called out her name. Silence was his answer. He then took a couple more steps, and the hall led directly onto this open kitchen. So he wandered over, hearing how the loudest silence you can ever imagine. Looked at the countertop, which kind of divided the hall from the kitchen. On there was a Pizza Hut pizza box. She must have ordered pizza. And then looking over into the kitchen, he saw his girlfriend Karen's body laying right there, face up, and she was covered in blood. Tim could tell immediately that she was dead, and he called 911.
911, emergency? Please come. Send the police. What's going on there, sir? Karen's dead. Is that your wife? No, it's my girlfriend. It's what? My girlfriend. I just came over here and I found her. Please hurry. Please. Is this suspicious, sir? I would say so, yeah. I haven't touched anything. I opened the door and she's in the kitchen. There's blood everywhere.
Karen Pannell worked at the customer check-in desk for American Airlines in Tampa Airport, and it was a job she was good at and she loved by all accounts. See, Karen was the youngest of 6 siblings and the only girl amongst the kids. She was in fact born in Germany, as her father was stationed there in the military at the time. The youngest, she was a real family gal. She was the one, who'd organize all the get-togethers, the family dinners, the family events. That was something that was as always, extremely important to our Karen Pannell. And she had a very special relationship with her 5 older brothers. As you can imagine, not only the youngest kid, but also the only girl. They all were extremely protective of Karen. Before being a ticket agent at the airport, Karen had been a model, if you can believe that. Yeah, folks, a model. She was a looker. Look at those eyes. Very nice. But then, she'd given that up and she'd begun to work as a ticket agent at Tampa Bay Airport for American Airlines. But she quickly gained this reputation of being just the sweetest person. Whenever they would have, a passenger who was being a bit unruly, right, started shouting and roaring his head off, Karen, she would placate them. She was so good at talking to people, calming people down, chilling people out, and to the point where she'd actually risen up to being a supervisor in her position. However, it seemed that her ability to placate people, it hadn't worked this time. Someone had taken a knife to her again and again and again. Over a dozen times, Karen had been stabbed inside her own kitchen. Police arrived to this house in Oldsmar within minutes. When the police pulled up, Tim was already outside the front door. He was throwing up in the garden after just seeing his girlfriend. In a way, nobody ever wants to see anybody. They let Tim go and sit in one of their patrol cars, and of course, Tim also had to make the difficult decision of who to call first to let them know about Karen. In the meantime, the police were processing the scene, looking around for any evidence at all, knocking on the neighbors' doors. Did you see anything? Did you hear anything? It had been a terrifying scene. Karen had multiple stab wounds. She had been stabbed 16 or 17 times. It looked like there had been a fierce and bloody struggle before she was overpowered. There were signs of forced entry. The door at the rear of the home had been forced open. The cable box was also opened, like someone was trying to cut the wires and the phone lines. This made the police think that, maybe this had been a burglary, home invasion, robbery gone wrong, and, Karen had ended up dead. Inside they found, her purse had been completely upended. There was shite everywhere, as if somebody had been rifling around. But then again, this was a 39-year-old customer service agent who worked for an airline. It's not like she would have had gold bars hidden away in a safe. However, one thing stood out as much as the bloody body, which sounds extremely hard to believe, but it stood out because it was red writing on a white wall. Above Karen's body, written on the wall, was ROC, and it looked like it had been written in blood. A nightmarish message, but had it been written by the killed or the killer? Well, leaning over and of course trying not to move the body, they could see Karen, who was face up on the ground, but on her right index finger, they could see a smudge of blood. It looked like in her dying moments, after the killer had fled the scene, she had dipped her own finger in her own blood and written ROC on the wall before passing. But what does ROC mean? Almost immediately, Tim was still sitting in the backseat of a patrol car, and the police come up to him and were like, listen, sorry, shit happens. Where were you last night? Now, Tim told them the story of what had happened. He had been there the previous night, but had left at around 7:30, and then he went to go up and hang out with some friends at about an hour away. Police called those friends. They backed up his alibi. Yep, we were with Tim last night. Tim was extremely cooperative. He was very helpful. He had nothing to hide with the police. They then, of course, asked, the circle spreads out from there. Karen's co-workers, her colleagues, her friends, her neighbors, her family, everybody. And they needed to know one thing. What or whom was ROC? Whom be that? Well, it wasn't an acronym or anything. It was literally that. Rock. The name Rock. And they learned Rock, Karen's close ones asked, who's Rock? Karen had an ex-boyfriend named Rock. Rock Herpick was an insurance adjuster. He had dated Karen for over a year. They had even lived together, but it had ended in a bad way. Rock had been known to have legal problems and drug problems. Their relationship had ended when Karen filed a domestic battery complaint against him. He had kicked in her door one time trying to get to her. See, when Karen and Rock had met, Karen had just gotten out of a 5-year marriage followed by a very messy divorce. She'd also just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS at the time, so she wasn't in the best place. Hence why, even though everybody warned her, hey, that Rock guy, bit of a stinkeroonie, sounds like he's bad news, she still kind of got with him, and I guess he was just there for her in that particular moment, so they got on really well together. Hey, he drove a Harley Davidson, so, slow your roll if you're gonna bitch about him. She really came to rely on him, and he was the one person who was there for her. Then the calls to the police started. 3 times the police were called to their home. Rock was brought in, he was questioned, where were you on the night of the murder? And of course, though the questions begin and the accusations begin, and Rock says, no, Karen, she's the one, don't be looking at me. She is the one who was like abusive. She was violent. She would throw shit at me all the time. And of course, as you can imagine, the detectives hearing Rock's spiel about actually he's innocent just roll their eyes like looking at him. Of course, you're never the problem. It's always somebody else. But still questioning Rock and whatever story he had about Karen who was dead and couldn't defend herself. He still actually had a pretty good alibi though. He was with his new girlfriend and her kids at the time of the murder, and that was fairly well like backed up. So why had Karen written his name in blood during her dying moments? Well, forensic technicians were, examining the scene and examining the ROC they were actually kind of like perplexed, I guess is the only way you'd say. They were perplexed. Couldn't believe it. It just didn't kind of make sense. The whole ROC thing is baffling. For a start, I mean, in her dying moments, that's what she writes, not try to get help or... I mean, most people, I guess, wouldn't think of that. It seems very movie-like. It's a bit dramatic for real life. Also, just the way it was smeared. I mean, it appeared to have been by Karen, but, like, there was no fingerprints on the smear of the ROC. I mean, if you write something in blood about anything, you're going to leave your fingerprints behind. This was, like, weirdly just dotted where the writing was. They then looked around and saw that there was a gardening glove in the kitchen. A single gardening glove. And they usually come in a couple, I believe, because most people have two hands, unless you don't. But there was no second glove. So this looked like somebody had put on a glove, dipped it in the blood, and then written it from the marks that were left behind on the wall. The police also learned that although Karen had blood on her finger, on her right index finger as if she had written it and it was smudged there, Karen was left-handed. If this was some kind of home invasion like the scene would lead you to believe with 4th century, how would a random burglar, robber / killer know the name of one of her ex-boyfriends? It had to have been done by somebody who knew her. They began to look at another man that Karen was going through some issues with. His name was Jeff. They had gone through a very messy divorce and Karen had gotten alimony and etc, etc. But when Karen got diagnosed with MS, well, she was like, I kind of need a bit more. Some more of that. Need a bit more. So that threw more shit on the fire. But Jeff was proven to be diving at the time of her murder. And so then the police, kind of just going around in circles, chasing their tail at this point, they began to learn a few more things about Tim Permenter. He had a dark-ass past. He was indeed a car salesman. He was not a former Special Forces military guy, but he had been in prison. Tim, in his younger days, had actually been a pimp, not a player, in Gainesville. He'd ran a business called Esquire Escorts. The girls would charge $100 for an hour. The girl would get 65, Tim will get 35. He said he was making like $7,000 a day before he was 20 years old. Which, I mean, can I? Hey, it's worth thinking about. Tim had actually done time for attempted kidnapping and attempted murder of one of his escort girls, one of his best hoes. Then he got involved in a shootout with a fellow Papajack. Things had not gone well, and he had been a kind of a bit of a gangster, I guess you would say. Now, he had done 12 years in prison for all of that. And so, Tim, now dating Karen for about 3 months, well, one day, maybe about a week or two before the murder, he said, listen, sit down. I've got a story to tell you. He decided to give Karen a version of the truth. Maybe just like a little bit watered down, listen, I may have been a pimp, but I was also a victim too of the horrendous sex trafficking industry that we're all really complicit in. That kind of shit he would just tell her, and it's like, some kind of watered down history of he was really helping these people or blah, 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 blah. Regardless, Karen kind of said, oh hell no, to any of this. She did not like that at all. And then, guess what? Day later, she comes into the American Airlines desk at her work in Tampa Bay Airport, and she was wearing a turtleneck. And her employees noticed, hey, this was in Florida, This was in, like, September. Very, very warm. Way too hot to be wearing a turtleneck sweater. And then Karen kind of does this. She had bruising all around her neck. Tim had told her she had freaked out, I would say fairly so. Tim then strangled her. Her coworkers, of course, immediately said, file a police report, dump his ass. For whatever reason, Karen didn't. So Tim, like Rock, could be a violent man. Police were very much focusing on Tim at this point, but he had an alibi. He was very cooperative with the police. You know, his friend was backing up his story that he was an hour away at the time of the murder. But detectives couldn't shake it, that there was something else here, some other clue that something had happened here. Things just didn't make sense, and although they had their suspicions about Tim, they asked him, they took the pictures, they asked him to take off all his clothes, and there was no scratches, no marks, no blood on him. They even searched his home. They found zero blood, around him, in his car, anywhere that could link to Karen's murder. Any evidence linking him, zero. It was then they did the one more thing, right? The pizza box, the Pizza Hut pizza box that was sitting on her counter. Well, Tim said she must have ordered a pizza box after I left, and I left at 7:30 p.m. But Tim's fingerprints were on the pizza box, so that's odd. The receipt also showed that the pizza was delivered at 8:48 p.m. Tim said he left it over an hour before this. 3 slices of that pepperoni and cheese were missing, and the police doing the autopsy of Karen found no pizza in her stomach whatsoever. Tim claimed to have gone to his friends that night, but then, I didn't actually have my watch on me that day, so I couldn't keep track of time at all. So maybe I went there later than I said I did. Who knows these things? The police then checked Tim's phone records, and he had called the friend on his phone. The friend, he said he'd gone to at around 9:30 p.m. But that call was made at Karen's house, so he was still in Karen's at 9:30 p.m.
I didn't do it, but I knew somehow, some way, I was going to get pinned on it. I knew it. I knew the minute I saw the body.
One thing that we've been looking at too, Tim, obviously would be the cool part about like cell towers, cell phones, is they tell us exactly where somebody is.
Sure.
Okay. And your calls were coming from her place up until 9:30.
From her place?
From the cell tower, just a couple blocks from her place. It's the cell tower, and they have that. They can tell us. They actually give the address of the cell tower and hit.
I mean, when I was driving up to Newport Richie, I was going up 19.
Right. So you wouldn't have come anywhere near the cell tower. When you called 911, it was that same spot.
His friend would later recant the alibi, saying, "No, I was just trying to help out a friend. He didn't meet up with me that night." And in fact, his friend would say, "Yeah, Tim confessed to me that he murdered Karen." Tim was arrested and charged with Karen's murder. What likely happened is that Karen broke up or was on the verge of breaking with Tim over his dark history, so he turned up to the house as a vengeful ex, soon-to-be vengeful ex, at her house that evening. He had arrived. Him and Karen had been talking for a while. They'd been shooting the shit. They ordered pizza at one point. But before the pizza arrived, Karen, she took that dog out back and she said they were done. They were broken up. The pizza guy then arrived at 8:48 p.m. and he said, the pizza delivery man said that Tim opened the door to Karen's house and he said, Tim scowled at him. Big ugly mug on his face. This time though, instead of strangling her, he grabbed a knife and he stabbed Karen in the back, paralyzing her. She fell on the ground, she landed on her back, and he kept stabbing her, looking into her eyes the entire time, stabbing her 16 or 17 times. Then, sitting there trying to figure out how not to go to prison for the rest of his life, he sat down and started eating pizza, looking at his dead girlfriend. And so then he thought, I have a great idea. Karen told me about this, boyfriend she used to get in trouble with all the time. Bango bango, opens a drawer, sees a pair of gardening gloves, puts one on, leans over, dips it in Karen's blood, and writes his name, ROC, on the wall. Then he grabbed Karen's limp hand, dipped her right index finger in blood, forgetting of course that Karen is left-handed. He then upended her purse, broke the back door, opened the cable box to make it look like there had been some kind of home invasion here. When he arrived the next morning, he claimed to have discovered the scene and called the cops. One of his first calls in the back of the patrol car was to one of Karen's friends. He told her that Karen had been stabbed to death before the police could even determine that. Tim Permenter went on trial in 2007. Tim pleaded not guilty. He said he did not murder Karen. Now, of course, he had no blood on him. The police found no physical evidence that actually linked him to the scene. Yeah, a lot of it was actually circumstantial evidence that determined he had murdered Karen Pannell. The murder weapon was also never found. But regardless, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Tim guilty of first-degree murder. They actually voted in favor of the death penalty for Tim, but the judge overruled it and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And so there you have it. A liar, a con man, and a message written in blood. It might have been a good idea if it just wasn't so ridiculous. Thank you so much for watching. It means the absolute world to me. If you'd like to, see some more stories just like this one right here, please check out the That Chapter podcast, which releases a brand new episode every single Monday morning, and it's all podcast exclusive stories. They're all different to the ones I tell here, so please give it a go. But until the next old video, which will be out in a couple of days, that should be up sometime, daytime, nighttime, sometime. Who knows when I'll post the next one, but it will be soon, I can guarantee you that. Until then, please take care of each other, and please take care of yourselves. Do it for me. Thank you. Because you know what? I love you. Mike out.